In the vast emptiness of Wyoming, Jake McCullough has lived alone with his horses for so long, he's almost forgotten the sound of conversation. At 48, he's down to his last working horse and a ranch that's slowly slipping away. Each morning brings the same routine: mending fences, tending to his remaining livestock, and fighting back the quiet that threatens to swallow him whole. But when a stranded traveler appears on his trail, he offers his only horse without hesitation, not knowing she's Catherine Wells, a wealthy heiress running from her golden cage, searching for something real in a world of pretense. Will two lonely souls recognize what they've found in each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake's boots crunched across the frost-covered ground as he made his way to the barn, steam rising from the coffee in his chipped ceramic mug. Dawn was just beginning to paint the Wyoming sky, turning darkness into shades of purple and gold. Inside the barn, thunder nickered softly at his approach, the horse's breath visible in the cold morning air. "Morning, old friend," Jake murmured, setting his coffee on a weathered shelf. He ran his calloused hand along Thunder's neck, feeling the strong muscles beneath the chocolate-brown coat. The horse was the last of his working stock, the others sold off one by one as the ranch's fortunes had dwindled. Back in his office, really just a corner of the kitchen, Jake pulled out his grandfather's ledger from the desk drawer. The leather was worn smooth from decades of hands opening it, recording the daily business of the McCullough ranch. Jake traced his finger over his grandfather's neat handwriting, then his father's more practical scrawl, finally landing on his own entries. 3 generations of history told in numbers and notes. The early pages showed cattle counts in the thousands, healthy profit margins, and optimistic projections. His grandfather had built something remarkable here, starting with nothing but determination and a few hundred acres. Jake's father had maintained that legacy, modernizing where he could while respecting the old ways. Now Jake's entries told a different story. Cattle numbers down to barely 3 dozen, equipment repairs eating away at any profit, banks increasingly reluctant to extend credit to what they saw as a dying enterprise. The numbers didn't lie. The ranch was bleeding out slowly, like a wounded animal he couldn't save. Thunder's feed bag was getting lighter, the hay storage emptier. Jake had sold off most of the cattle last spring after a brutal winter, but he'd held on to Thunder. The horse wasn't just livestock. He was family, the last link to better days when the corrals were full of life and the future seemed as wide open as the Wyoming sky. Rising from the desk, Jake's gaze fell on the family photos lining the wall. His grandfather, standing proud in front of the original homestead. His father teaching a young Jake how to rope. His mother in her garden, now long gone wild. The ranch had been more than a business to them. It was their legacy, their gift to future generations. And now, under his watch, it was slipping away. Thunder stamped impatiently outside, reminding Jake that memories wouldn't mend fences or feed cattle. He tucked the ledger away, but not before a yellowed receipt fluttered to the floor. Picking it up, he smiled despite himself. It was from 1962, when his grandfather had bought their first registered Hereford bull. The price noted would barely buy a tank of gas today. Jake pulled on his worn leather jacket and headed back out. The sun was fully up now, painting the distant mountains in morning light. There was work to be done, regardless of what the ledger said. As long as he had Thunder and these acres his family had worked for 3 generations, he'd keep going. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were stacked against you. He mounted Thunder, feeling the familiar creak of leather and the solid warmth of the horse beneath him. Together, they rode out to check the fence line, like they did every morning. The ranch might be struggling, but up here with the wind in, his face and Thunder's sure stride beneath him, Jake could almost believe that everything would somehow work out. Almost. The mail truck's dust trail was visible long before it reached the ranch entrance. Jake watched it approach from his perch on the fence, where he'd been repairing a loose board. These days, the mail never brought good news, just bills and bank notices, each one heavier than the last. The carrier slowed just enough to stuff the envelopes into the old metal box at the end of the drive. Jake waited until the truck disappeared over the horizon before climbing down to collect them. There was no point in small talk anymore. He'd run out of optimistic responses to, "How's the ranch doing?" Among the pile was a thick envelope from First Wyoming Bank, the crisp paper and professional letterhead a stark contrast to his dirt-stained hands. He didn't need to open it to know what it said. The same message had been coming for months now, each letter more insistent than the last. Inside his kitchen, Jake spread the letters across the table. "Final notice," the newest one declared. In bold red letters, "Payment due, account past due." He'd been juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul, trying to keep the wolves from the door just a little longer. The bank manager, Tom Wilson, had known Jake's father. They'd done business with a handshake and mutual understanding that farming and ranching had good years and bad. But Tom had retired 2 years ago, replaced by someone from Chicago who saw the ranch as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. "Your father would understand if you sold," the new manager had said during their last meeting, his designer. Suit out of place in the small-town bank. Times change. You can't fight progress. Jake had wanted to tell him about the generations of blood, sweat, and dreams soaked into this land. About how his grandfather had survived the Dust Bowl here, his father the farm crisis of the 80s, about how some things were worth more than money. Instead, he'd just walked out. Now, staring at the final notice, Jake felt the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him. The bank wanted their money, and they didn't care about history or tradition. 3 generations of McCulloughs had worked this land, but it might end with him. Thunder's whinny from the paddock drew his attention. The horse needed new shoes, the barn roof needed repairs, and the ancient tractor was running on prayers and baling wire. Each need represented money he didn't have, choices he couldn't afford to make. Jake pulled out his checkbook, its pages growing thin. He could cover the minimum payment barely, but it would leave nothing for feed next month. The ranch was dying by inches, and he was running out of ways to save it. His father's words echoed in his memory. A McCullough never gives up. But his father had never faced odds like these. The small ranches were disappearing one by one, swallowed up by corporate operations or carved into vacation homes for city folks who thought cowboys were quaint relics of a bygone era. The phone rang, startling him. Probably the bank, following up their letter with a personal touch. Jake let it ring into silence. Tomorrow, he'd drive into town and try to negotiate one more extension. Today, there were fences to mend and cattle to move. Real work that needed doing. He tucked the final notice into his father's old Bible, alongside all the others. The good book was getting thick with bad news, but it seemed the right place to keep them. If anyone was listening up there, Jake could use a miracle about now. Outside, Thunder waited patiently by the gate, ready for their afternoon rounds. The horse's quiet strength was a comfort, a reminder that not everything could be measured in dollars and cents. Some wealth couldn't be counted by bankers or listed on spreadsheets. Jake mounted up, letting the familiar rhythm of Thunder's gait calm his troubled thoughts. The land stretched out before them, beautiful and unforgiving as ever, whatever tomorrow brought today. He was still a McCullough on McCullough land. For now, that would have to be enough. The setting sun cast long shadows across Jake's living room as he settled into his father's old leather armchair. The day's work was done, but sleep wouldn't come easy with all the thoughts churning in his mind. His hands found their way to the worn photo album on the side table, its pages soft and fuzzy at the corners from years of turning. The first photo always caught his breath. Sarah on their wedding day, her smile bright enough to light up the whole ranch. She'd been a city girl who fell in love with both him and this harsh, beautiful land. 10 years together hadn't been nearly enough before cancer took her, leaving him alone with 1,000 acres of memories. "You'd know what to do," he whispered to her image. Sarah had been the one with the head for business, always planning, always looking ahead. She'd started computerizing the ranch records before she got sick, trying to drag the McCullough operation into the modern age. Jake turned the page. His parents' 40th anniversary celebration in the barn, hay bales decorated with wildflowers and Christmas lights. His mother's garden in full bloom, a paradise of colors she'd carved out of the Wyoming earth through sheer determination. His father teaching him to ride, both of them squinting into the sun, while a young Jake clutched the saddle horn. The neighboring Peterson place was visible in the background of several shots, now sold and subdivided into ranchettes for wealthy out-of-staters who wanted to play cowboy on the weekends. The Petersons had held out as long as they could, just like he was doing now. Thunder's distant nickering drew Jake's attention to the window. The horse was staring at something in the gathering dusk, ears pricked forward. Probably another deer coming down from the high country, looking for easy grazing. The herd that used to pass through each fall was smaller every year, pushed out by the same development that was threatening the ranches. A cloud of dust rose from the road leading to town. Another real estate agent, most likely. They'd been circling like vultures lately, sensing weakness. Each one carried the same rehearsed speech about market realities and golden opportunities, as if you could measure opportunity in dollars and cents. Jake closed the album and stood, his joints, protesting the long day's work. The house felt especially empty tonight, the quiet broken only by the tick of his grandfather's old clock and the whisper of wind through poorly sealed windows. The repairs never ended, and nowadays he could only afford to fix what was absolutely necessary. Sarah's voice seemed to echo in the silence. The ranch isn't just land, Jake. It's a story we're all part of. She'd understood that, city girl or not, understood why he couldn't just walk away, even when the numbers said he should. He walked to the window, watching Thunder settle in for the night. The horse would need new shoes soon, another expense he'd have to figure out how to cover. But Thunder was the last link to the days when the corrals were full of life and possibility, when the McCullough brand still meant something in these parts. The photo album lay open to a family gathering from better days, everyone smiling, unaware of what the future held. Jake looked at their faces in the fading light, each one carrying a piece of the ranch's story. His story. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, these memories were enough to remind him why he kept fighting. Jake first noticed the dust cloud rising from the eastern trail late in the afternoon. He paused in his fence mending, squinting. Against the sun. It was too small to be a vehicle, too steady to be wildlife. Through his binoculars, he made out a solitary figure walking, occasionally stopping to check what looked like a map. Nobody walked out here. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and the tourist season had ended months ago. He watched as the figure grew closer, revealing a woman in hiking clothes, a worn backpack slung over her shoulders. Her careful steps suggested blisters, and her slightly hunched posture spoke of exhaustion. Thunder shifted nervously beside him, sensing his rider's attention. The horse's ears pricked forward as the woman drew near enough for them to hear her boots crunching on the dusty trail. She looked up, startled to find them watching. Despite her obvious fatigue, she carried herself with an unconscious grace that seemed at odds with her trail-worn appearance. Her backpack, Jake noticed, was an expensive brand artfully distressed to look ordinary. The kind of thing you'd find in those boutique outdoor stores in Jackson Hole, not your basic REI gear. "I'm sorry to intrude," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of refinement she couldn't quite hide. "I seem to have taken a wrong turn a few miles back. I don't suppose you could point me toward Millbrook?" Jake shifted in his saddle. Millbrook was 30 miles in the opposite direction from where she'd come. Whatever story she was telling, it wasn't the whole truth. Yet something in her eyes, a mixture of determination and barely concealed desperation, made him hold back his questions. "That's quite a way off," he said instead. "You're headed the wrong direction entirely." She pushed back a strand of dark hair that had escaped her practical braid, and Jake caught a glimpse of an expensive watch partially hidden under her sleeve. Another detail that didn't quite fit the backpacker image. Oh, the word carried weight, beyond its size. She glanced back the way she'd come, then down at her boots, where Jake could now see dark spots of blood seeping through her socks. "I don't suppose. Is there somewhere closer I could rest for the night?" Thunder chose that moment to step forward, stretching his neck toward the stranger. To Jake's surprise, she didn't flinch. Instead, she reached out with quiet confidence, letting the horse catch her scent before gently stroking his nose. "He's beautiful," she said softly, and this time her voice carried no artifice. "Quarter horse?" "Morgan," Jake corrected, finding himself oddly pleased by her interest. "Name's Thunder, last of our working stock." She nodded appreciatively, her hands moving with practiced ease over Thunder's neck. Another contradiction. Designer watch and trail-worn clothes, lost backpacker and confident horsewoman. "I'm Catherine," she offered, not providing a last name. Her eyes met his directly, carrying a silent plea he couldn't quite decipher. Jake knew he should be more cautious. Strange women didn't just wander onto remote ranches by accident, especially not ones who wore $1,000 watches and tried to look like ordinary hikers. But the weight of eating alone every night for the past 5 years, of talking to no one but Thunder and the occasional delivery driver, pressed against him. "There's a spare room," he heard himself saying. "Nothing fancy, but it's clean. You can rest up, and tomorrow I'll point you in the right direction." The relief that flooded her face seemed genuine enough. As she gathered her backpack, Jake noticed how she winced, finally allowing herself to show the pain she'd been hiding. "I know it's not my place," he said, dismounting, "but those feet need looking at before you do any more walking." He patted Thunder's flank. "Why don't you ride? I can walk us back to the house." Catherine hesitated, one hand still on her backpack. For a moment, Jake thought she would refuse. Then Thunder nickered softly, pushing his nose against her shoulder, and her resistance melted. "Thank you," she said simply, but the words carried more weight than a simple acceptance of a ride. Jake helped her mount, noting how she settled naturally into the saddle, despite her obvious exhaustion. He gathered Thunder's reins and began leading them back toward the ranch house, aware that he was probably making a mistake, but unable to find it in himself to care. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Catherine's backpack shifted as Thunder moved, and Jake caught the glint of something that might have been a satellite phone, definitely not standard hiking gear. Whoever she was, whatever she was running from or toward, she had her reasons for being out here alone. Sometimes, he reflected, watching Thunder carry his mysterious passenger with gentle care, the right thing and the sensible thing weren't the same. His father used to say that hospitality was a sacred trust out here, where the distances were long and the margins for error were thin. A stranger in need was a stranger indeed. As they approached the ranch house, Jake noticed how Catherine took in everything with keen eyes that missed no detail. The weathered paint, the carefully maintained equipment, the small signs of financial struggle he'd learned to live with, but never quite stopped seeing. Her gaze held no judgment, only a kind of recognition that made him wonder what burdens she carried beneath her carefully constructed facade. Tomorrow would bring its own complications. For tonight, he had a guest to tend to, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the ranch's empty rooms would hold a voice other than his own. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sound of Thunder's impatient whicker from the paddock. Jake found Catherine already awake, standing on the porch with her bandaged feet carefully tucked into loose slippers he'd dug out of Sarah's. "Old things. Hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the coffee pot she'd found and filled. "Seemed the least I could do." The coffee was stronger than he usually made it, with a richness that spoke of expensive beans rather than his usual store brand. Another small tell she probably didn't realize she was giving away. "Reckon you'll be wanting to head to Millbrook today," Jake said, accepting a cup. I can show you the right trail. He paused, studying her still swollen feet, though those blisters might have other ideas. Catherine's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her mug. Actually, I was thinking, that is, if you could use an extra pair of hands around here, maybe I could stay a few days, just until my feet heal up. I'm stronger than I look. Jake pulled out his grandfather's trail map from the rack by the door, spreading it across the porch railing. The paper was yellow with age, its creases soft from decades of folding and unfolding. 3 generations of McCulloughs had marked their cattle drives on this map, each adding their own notes about water sources and sheltered valleys. Ranch work isn't like hiking, he said carefully. It's not something you pick up in a day. She moved closer to study the map, her eyes tracing the familiar paths he'd ridden hundreds of times. Then teach me. I'm a quick learner and, she hesitated, I could use some time away from everything. I can pay my way. Jake looked at her, sharply, but her gaze remained fixed on the map. She was running from something, that much was clear, but her eyes held a determination he recognized, the same look he'd seen in his own mirror plenty of times when the bank letters piled up, and giving up would have been easier than going on. No payment, he said finally. We'll work out a fare. Trade your labor for room and board. First thing you'll need to learn is how to ride properly, not just stay on. The smile that lit up her face seemed to brighten the whole porch. Deal, she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm softer than any ranch hand's had a right to be. But there was nothing soft about her determination. Jake found himself marking out a route on the old map, showing her the boundaries of the ranch, the streams that never ran dry, the sheltered valleys where cattle gathered in storms. She asked intelligent questions, noting details about the terrain that many would have missed. Thunder watched them from the paddock, his ears pricked forward with interest at this break in routine. The horse seemed to have taken to Catherine, just as Jake's mother's old slippers had somehow found their way to her feet. We'll start with the basics, Jake said, folding the map with practiced ease. How to read the land, how to move with your horse instead of just sitting on him. The rest will come. Catherine nodded, her face serious. I won't let you down. Looking at her there in the morning light, city soft hands wrapped around a coffee mug, but eyes sharp with purpose, Jake had the unsettling feeling that she meant more than just learning ranch work. He pushed the thought away. Whatever her story was, it would come out in its own time. For now, there were horses to tend to and fences to check, real work that needed doing, and a new hand to break in. Jake tucked the old map away, its creases, holding generations of journeys. Maybe it was time to add some new trails to its weathered surface. After a long day of checking fence lines, Jake built a small fire in the pit behind the house. The autumn evening had turned cool, stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky. Catherine sat on an old log, her borrowed boots stretched toward the flames, while thunder grazed contentedly nearby. You're a natural with him, Jake said, nodding toward the horse. Most city folks, they try too hard, but you got a quiet way about you. Catherine smiled, but her eyes stayed on the fire. My grandfather had horses. Before everything changed, I mean. Before the family business became what it is now. She caught herself, as if she'd said too much. Jake disappeared into the house, returning with an old guitar case he hadn't opened in years. The instrument inside was well worn, but carefully maintained, its wood glowing in the firelight. Sarah used to love evenings like this, he said softly, running his fingers over the strings. She'd make me play until my fingers ached. Sarah. Catherine's voice was gentle, inviting, but not pushing. Jake tuned the guitar slowly, each note, bringing back memories. My wife lost her to cancer 5 years ago. Some days it feels like yesterday, others like a lifetime. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing upward. Catherine wrapped her arms around her knees, looking smaller somehow. I'm sorry. It must be lonely out here. It is. Jake surprised himself with his honesty, but there's peace in it too. Or there was, until the bank started circling. His fingers found an old melody, one his father had taught him. The music seemed to fill the empty spaces between them, making the night feel less vast. My whole life has been planned out since I was born, Catherine said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Every decision, every relationship, every future move plotted on some corporate spreadsheet. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe under the weight of all those expectations. Jake let the music fade, watching her profile in the firelight. She looked younger suddenly, more vulnerable. Is that why you're out here? Running from expectations? Running towards something, maybe. I just don't know what yet. She turned to face him. But this, right here, this feels real. More real than anything in my life has felt in years. Thunder nickered softly in the darkness, as if agreeing. Jake's fingers returned to the strings, finding a gentler tune. Real comes with its own price. Out here, nothing's ever easy on a ranch. Maybe easy isn't what I need. Catherine's voice carried a certainty that hadn't been there before. Maybe I just need true. They sat in comfortable silence after that, letting the music and the fire speak for them. The stars wheeled overhead, countless and clear in the Wyoming night. Jake played until his fingers remembered all the old songs, and Catherine listened, as if hearing music for the first time. When the fire burned low and the night chill deepened, neither seemed eager to break the spell. There were questions unasked, truths still hidden, but for now this moment was enough. Two souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's company, while an old guitar played forgotten songs to the prairie wind. Dawn found Catherine slipping out to the old barn, her phone clutched in her hand like a guilty secret. She'd been checking it daily in private, deleting the mounting messages from her corporate life, urgent emails about board meetings, her assistant's increasingly frantic texts, her father's terse demands for an explanation, 27 missed calls, 42 unread emails, each one a thread trying to pull her back to a world she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. Looking for the, "Hey, Fork," Jake's voice made her jump. She fumbled the phone into her pocket, but not before he caught a glimpse of its sleek design, the latest model, worth more than a month's ranch expenses. I was just... The lie died on her lips as she met his eyes. He didn't press her, didn't demand explanations, but his quiet gaze held a weight that made her shoulders sag. "Getting my bearings," she finished lamely. He nodded, running a hand along Thunder's flank as the horse pushed his head over the stall door. "Bearings are good to have, especially when you're not sure where you're headed." The words could have been accusatory, but his tone held only understanding. Catherine found herself studying his face in the early light, the laugh lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the quiet strength in his features. In just a few days, he'd begun to feel more real to her than anyone. In her boardroom world. "I'm not who you think I am," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Never figured you were." Jake reached for a brush, beginning Thunder's morning grooming with practiced strokes. "Question is, are you who you think you are?" The question caught her off guard. In the corporate world, she was Catherine Wells, heir to the Wells financial empire, the Ice Queen of Wall Street, according to some particularly creative journalists. Here she was just Catherine, learning to ride, to mend fences, to exist without the weight of her name. "I'm starting to wonder," she admitted. Thunder nudged her shoulder, nearly knocking her off balance. Jake steadied her with a hand on her arm, the touch sending unexpected warmth through her despite the morning chill. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. "Better get started on the north pasture," Jake said finally, his hand dropping away. "Those cattle won't move themselves." Catherine nodded, grateful for the return to practicality, but as she followed him out of the barn, her phone felt heavier than ever in her pocket. Each day here made her double life harder to maintain, yet the thought of leaving made her chest tight with an unfamiliar ache. They worked side by side through the morning, their rhythm together becoming more natural with each passing day. Jake showed her how to read the cattle's movements, how to position herself to guide them gently. His instructions were patient, his praise genuine when she got things right. But there were moments when she caught him watching her with questions. In his eyes, when she used a technical term no casual hiker would know, when her mask of simplicity slipped to reveal glimpses of boardroom confidence. Each time, he would look away, giving her the space to keep her secrets. The weight of those secrets was starting to bow her shoulders. Every time he shared another piece of his life, stories of his family, his struggles with the bank, his hopes. For the ranch, she felt the distance her lies created between them. She was learning to love this life of honest work and straight talk while living a lie at its very heart. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She ignored it, focusing instead on the way Jake's hands moved as he demonstrated how to check a fence line, on the sound of his voice explaining the ranch's history, on the warmth in his eyes when he caught her watching him. The truth would have to come out eventually, but for now, she held on to these moments, real and raw and more precious than anything in the world she'd left behind. The afternoon sun painted the meadow in shades of gold and amber as Catherine dismounted, her movements now confident after days of practice. She knelt to examine a patch of late-blooming wildflowers, their purple petals defiant against the approaching autumn. "My mother used to press flowers like these," Jake said, joining her. He pulled out his mother's old Bible from his saddlebag, its pages thick with decades of preserved blooms. "Said you could keep a piece of summer through the winter if you knew how." Catherine gently touched a pressed Indian paintbrush, its red still vivid against the thin pages. "They're beautiful, like memories caught between pages. Found this? One on my wedding day," Jake said, pointing to a delicate white blossom. "And these," he turned the page to reveal more pressed flowers. "Mother collected them during her last summer, said the meadow was putting on a show just for her." Thunder grazed nearby as they sat among the wildflowers, the Bible open between them. Catherine's fingers traced the dried petals with surprising tenderness, and Jake found himself watching her hands, no longer city soft after days of ranch work, but still graceful. "I used to have a garden," she said quietly, "on my penthouse balcony." She caught herself, but Jake pretended not to notice the slip. "Just a few pots, but they were mine, something real in a world of spreadsheets and smartphones." Jake nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "Real things matter out here. Can't fake your way through a day's work or sweet talk a horse into trusting you. Is that why you've never asked?" Her eyes met his. "About who I really am, where I came from. Figure you'll tell me when you're ready." He carefully pressed a fresh purple blossom between the Bible's pages. "Some flowers only bloom when they're ready, no matter how much you wish for spring." Catherine's breath caught at the simple wisdom in his words. She'd spent her life surrounded by people trying to force things, growth, profits, relationships. But here, watching Jake's weathered hands preserve a delicate flower with such care, she understood something about patience and trust. "I'm scared," she admitted, surprising herself. "Scared that when you know the truth, all this will change, that it won't feel real anymore." Jake closed the Bible gently, tucking it back into his saddlebag. "Real is real, Catherine. Truth doesn't change that, just adds to it like layers in the earth." A meadowlark called from a nearby fence post, its song clear and true in the afternoon quiet. Catherine found herself leaning against Jake's shoulder, the warmth of him solid and reassuring. He didn't pull away. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I wish we could just stay in this moment. No past, no future, just now." "Now's all we ever really have," Jake replied, his voice soft. "Rest is just worry and memories." They sat together as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the meadow. Thunder wandered closer, nickering softly, reminding them of evening chores waiting back at the ranch. But for these few precious moments, they remained still, letting the peace of the wildflower meadow wash over them. When they finally mounted, up to head back, Catherine carried a few carefully chosen blooms, ready for pressing. Jake watched her tuck them safely away, seeing in her gentle handling of the flowers a woman far more complex than she pretended to be, yet somehow more real than any facade she might be hiding behind. The old radio crackled to life in the pre-dawn darkness, its weather band signal cutting through layers of static. Jake adjusted the dial with practiced fingers, the way his father had taught him. The battered device had survived 3 decades of ranch life, its plastic case yellowed, but its purpose unchanged. Out here, weather wasn't just conversation, it was survival. Severe storm system approaching from the northwest, the metallic voice announced. Expected to hit Wyoming's eastern counties by nightfall. High winds, potential flash flooding. Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the radio's urgent tone. She'd adapted to ranch hours, rising before the sun without complaint. How bad? Bad enough. Jake switched off the radio, his face grave. We've got work to do before it hits. Cattle need moving to higher ground, equipment to secure, hay to cover. Thunder's nervous whicker from the paddock confirmed the coming storm. Animals always knew first, felt it in their bones before humans. Could read the signs. Tell me what to do, Catherine said, her voice steady. She'd shed her hesitation about ranch work days ago, throwing herself into each task with determination that both impressed and puzzled Jake. No ordinary hiker would take to this life so naturally. They worked through the morning, moving cattle to sheltered valleys as dark clouds built on the horizon. Catherine rode like she'd been born to it now, anticipating Thunder's movements, reading the cattle's behavior. Every so often, Jake caught himself watching her, the confident set of her shoulders, the quiet authority in her commands, the way she settled arguments between steers with a mere shift of her position. The radio's warnings grew more frequent, more urgent. By afternoon, the wind had picked up, carrying the sharp scent of rain. They raced to cover hay bales, secure loose equipment, and reinforce the barn doors. My father would have called this battening down the hatches, Catherine said as they worked, then caught herself, a shadow crossing her face. Sounds like a man who knew storms, Jake replied carefully, watching her expression. He did. Does. In his own way. She turned away, busying herself with a stubborn rope. Different kind of storms than this, though. Thunder crashed in the distance, closer now. The horse that shared its name pressed against the barn wall, eyes rolling at the approaching tempest. Catherine moved to calm him, murmuring softly, her hands sure on his neck. You're good with him, Jake said, checking the barn's roof supports, like you've handled valuable horses before. Catherine's hand stilled for just a moment. My grandfather, she started, then shook her head. We should check the generator. The radio buzzed again as they worked, its warnings now tinged with urgency. Flash flood alerts, wind advisories, tales of damage from towns to the northwest. Each report made Jake's jaw tighter. The ranch was vulnerable, especially with the creek running high from early snowmelt. Last big storm like this, he said, voice rough with memory, nearly lost the lower pasture. Sarah and I worked through the night, redirecting water from the creek. Just the two of us. Catherine met his eyes in the gathering darkness. It's not just you this time. The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully examine. Jake found himself wanting to trust her, wanting to believe in the strength and commitment he saw in her eyes. But the mysteries surrounding her nagged at him like the approaching storm, full of unknown potential for damage or salvation. The radio sputtered one final warning before the storm knocked out its signal completely. Thunder, both the horse and the sky, voiced their unease as the wind rose to a howl outside the barn. Whatever's coming, Catherine said softly. We'll face it together. Jake nodded, knowing she meant more than just the storm. As the first heavy drops began to fall, he wondered which would prove more devastating, the tempest rolling in from the northwest, or the secret still lurking behind Catherine's determined eyes. The storm hit just after sunset, turning twilight, to pitch darkness, broken only by brilliant flashes of lightning. Jake rummaged through an old chest in the mudroom, pulling out his father's ranch slicker, a heavy oilskin coat worn smooth by years of use. Here, he said, holding it out to Catherine. You'll need this more than me. His own coat was newer, but less waterproof, the kind of compromise he'd had to make as the ranch's finances tightened. Catherine slipped into the oversized coat, its shoulders bearing the memory of 2 generations of McCullough men. The sleeves hung past her fingertips, but she rolled them back with practiced efficiency. "Thank you, but what about you?" A thunderous crack interrupted his response, followed by Thunder's panicked whinny from the barn. They rushed out into the deluge, rain stinging their faces as they fought their way across the yard. Inside the barn, the horse paced nervously, his hooves drumming an anxious rhythm on the floorboards. Catherine moved to him immediately, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. The old slicker's familiar scent seemed to calm Thunder as she stroked his neck. "Creek's rising," Jake called over the storm's roar, peering through the barn doors. "We need to check the levee." They worked their way down to the creek bed, fighting wind and rain. Catherine moved with surprising sureness in the darkness, anticipating Jake's needs without being told. When he needed the rope, she had it ready. When the flashlight beam wavered, she steadied his arm. The creek had become an angry torrent, threatening to breach its banks. Jake's father had built a simple levee system years ago, but it required constant attention during storms. They began placing sandbags at the weakest points, their movements synchronized by necessity and growing trust. Like this, Jake showed her how to position the bags for maximum effect. "My father taught me during the flood of '93, said water's like life. You can't stop it, but you can guide it if you're smart about it." Catherine nodded, her face serious in the flashlight's beam. Rain ran down her cheeks, but the old slicker kept her core dry as they worked. Something about seeing her in his father's coat, handling each crisis with calm determination, made Jake's chest tight with emotions he wasn't ready to name. A massive lightning strike illuminated the valley, followed immediately by a deafening crack. Through the darkness, they heard the distinctive sound of splitting wood. "The old cottonwood!" Jake shouted. If it fell wrong, it could dam the creek, sending water straight toward the barn. They raced toward the ancient tree, its massive bulk now leaning precariously over the water. Catherine didn't hesitate, taking one end of the rope while Jake secured the other to Thunder's saddle. Together, they worked to guide the tree's fall away from the creek. The slicker moved with Catherine as if it had been made for her, its well-worn leather protecting her from the worst of the debris as they wrestled with the rope. Jake found himself remembering his father in that same coat, teaching him how to read weather, how to protect what mattered, how to hold on when everything tried to pull you under. Hours passed in a blur of rain and mud and shared purpose. Every time Jake thought they'd gotten ahead of the storm, it threw a new challenge at them. But Catherine never flagged, never complained. She matched him task for task, her determination as steady as the rain. Near dawn, the storm finally began to ease. They stood on the creek bank watching the water level slowly drop. Catherine was covered in mud, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes were bright with the triumph of survival. "You did good," Jake said simply. In the growing light, he could see his father's coat had gained a new set of scratches, new stories to tell. "We did good," Catherine corrected, then smiled. "Though I think your father's coat may never forgive me." Jake touched the sleeve of the slicker gently. "He'd be proud. Coats meant to work, not hang in a closet, like the ranch itself." Catherine's smile faded slightly, something complicated passing behind her eyes. She shrugged off the coat, handling it with a respect that spoke volumes. "Your father must have been quite a man." "He was." Jake draped the slicker over a fence post to dry. "Taught me that character shows up best in storms, that how a person handles trouble tells you who they really are." Their eyes met in the grey dawn light, both aware of the weight of his words. Catherine touched the old coat one last time, her fingers lingering on its weathered surface as if trying to absorb its history, its lessons about endurance and truth. The morning after the storm dawned clear and crisp, the ranch washed clean by rain. Jake was checking storm damage when he heard the familiar rumble of Ben Wheeler's delivery truck approaching. The old driver had been bringing supplies and mail to the remote ranches for over 2 decades. "Quite a storm," Ben called out, climbing down with his usual bundle. "Thought I might not make it through. Roads washed out past Miller's Creek." Jake nodded, reaching for the packages, but Ben held onto them, his weathered face unusually serious. "Something else you should see, Jake." He pulled out a copy of the Wall Street Journal, already folded to an interior page. "Ain't this your house guest?" The color photo showed Catherine in a tailored business suit, standing confidently before a corporate logo. The headline read, "Wells Financial Heiress Missing. Catherine Wells, CEO apparent, vanishes before crucial merger." Jake's world tilted as he read further. Catherine Wells, daughter of banking magnate Robert Wells, had disappeared 2 weeks ago, leaving her position as executive vice president of Wells Financial. The company was in the middle of negotiating a major merger, one that would consolidate their hold on several regional banks, including First Wyoming Bank, the same bank that was pressuring him to sell the ranch. Thunder nickered from the paddock, drawing Jake's attention to Catherine as she emerged from the barn. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there, her clothes and hands dirty from honest work. But now he saw what he should have noticed before, the subtle grace that spoke of expensive finishing schools, the natural authority of someone born to command boardrooms. "Jake," she approached, then stopped short at his expression. Her eyes fell to the newspaper in his hands, and all the color drained from her face. "Catherine Wells," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Executive Vice President of Wells Financial, the company that's about to take over First Wyoming Bank." She took a step forward, then stopped as he backed away. "Jake, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you played me for a fool? How you came here to what? Scout out the property? Get a first-hand look at the poor rancher who wouldn't sell?" "No!" The word burst from her like a physical force. "It wasn't like that. I didn't even know about your bank until—" "Until what? Until you got enough information to take back to Daddy's boardroom?" The betrayal burned in his chest, making it hard to breathe. "Was any of it real? Or was I just some quaint local color for your little adventure?" Ben quietly got back in his truck, leaving the paper and packages on the ground. The sound of his engine fading away felt like the last connection to normal, slipping out of reach. "Everything that happened here was real," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "More real than anything in my life. I never meant to hurt you. I was running away, trying to find something authentic." "Authentic?" Jake's laugh was harsh. "You want authentic? Try watching your family legacy slip away piece by piece. Try facing foreclosure on land your grandfather died defending. That authentic enough for you?" Thunder pushed his head over the fence, sensing the tension. Catherine reached for him automatically, but Jake stepped between them. "Don't, he's not yours to comfort. Jake, please." She was crying now, all pretense stripped away. "What I found here, with you, it changed everything. I was going to tell you." "When? After the merger went through? After your companies swallowed up the bank and came for my land?" He threw the newspaper at her feet. "Were you going to wait until you could offer to save me yourself? The wealthy heiress and the poor rancher. Bet that would make a great story for your socialite friends." "That's not fair." Her voice rose, showing the steel beneath the surface for the first time. "You don't know anything about my life, what I've been fighting against." "No, I don't. Because you lied about everything." The quiet hurt in his voice seemed to cut her more deeply than his anger. "I trusted you, let you into my home, my life, showed you things I haven't shared with anyone since Sarah died." Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, looking small despite her straight spine. "I never lied about how I felt, about what this place, what you, came to mean to me." "Pretty words." Jake turned away, unable to look at her. "You're good with those. Probably comes with the MBA. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things they'd shared and all the truths they'd hidden. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" What you were always going to do anyway. Go home. Jake started walking toward the barn, his boots heavy on the rain-soaked ground. Your kind always does. Jake, I've got work to do. Real work, not playing at it. You can have an hour to pack your things. I'll drive you into town. He didn't look back as he walked away. Didn't want to see if she was crying or angry or relieved to finally be free of her masquerade. Thunder whinnied, a sound of distress that echoed the pain in Jake's chest. In the barn, he leaned against Thunder's stall, breathing in the familiar sense of hay and horse and honest labor. The morning sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like all the dreams he'd been foolish enough to build these past weeks. When he finally returned to the house an hour later, Catherine was gone. She'd left his father's slicker hanging by the door, clean and carefully mended where it had torn in the storm. Beneath it lay a note, written in an elegant hand on expensive paper. Some truths are too big for words. I'm sorry for my deception, but not for a single moment we shared. What I found here was real. What I felt was real. And if you'll let me, I'll prove it. See. Jake crumpled the note and threw it in the wood stove. He had fences to mend, cattle to tend, a ranch to save. Reality didn't wait for broken hearts or betrayed trust. Out here, you either got back to work or you went under. But as he mounted Thunder and rode out to check the storm damage, he couldn't shake the memory of Catherine in his father's coat, working through the night to save his land. Real or pretend, that memory would haunt him for a long time to come. Dear Jake, the words stared up at Catherine from the expensive stationery in her Manhattan office, mocking her attempts to explain the unexplainable. Crumpled attempts littered her desk, each one failing to capture what she needed to say. The Wall Street view behind her seemed hollow now, all glass and steel with no substance. She'd been back a week, slipping seamlessly into designer suits and corporate meetings, as if she'd never left. As if a piece of her soul wasn't still wandering Wyoming pastures with a weathered rancher and his last good horse. Dear Catherine, Jake's pen hesitated over the lined paper torn from one of his ledgers. Thunder watched from the paddock as he sat on the porch, the evening sun painting the sky in colors that reminded him too much of her first night here. The ranch felt emptier now than it had before she came. Every corner held echoes of her presence, the coffee cup she'd used still sitting in the dish drain, the fresh hay in Thunder's stall stacked the way she'd learned to do it, the wildflowers, pressed between his mother's Bible pages, slowly drying. I don't expect you to forgive me, but please understand. Catherine set down her pen, watching rain streak down her office windows. The merger documents waited on her desk. First Wyoming Bank's assets laid out in clean columns and efficient graphs. Somewhere in those pages was Jake's ranch, reduced to numbers and potential profit margins. Her father had been surprised but pleased by her return, attributing her disappearance to pre-merger jitters. He didn't notice how she flinched every time someone mentioned agricultural foreclosures, or how she spent late nights poring over alternative financing options for struggling ranches. I should have seen the signs. Jake's letter trailed off, as Thunder nickered softly in the gathering dusk. The horse missed her, they both did, though Jake wasn't ready to admit it aloud. He'd thought the worst part would be the betrayal, but instead it was all the small moments, reaching for a second coffee cup in the morning, turning to share a sunset with someone who wasn't there, catching himself listening for the sound of her voice. The bank's latest notice sat unopened on his desk. He knew what it said, the same thing they always said, in increasingly final terms. You showed me what real means. Catherine's phone buzzed with another meeting reminder. The board was waiting for her presentation on rural market consolidation. She'd spent her life preparing for moments like this, but now all she could think about was the feeling of rain on her face during the storm, the weight of Jake's father's slicker on her shoulders, the trust in his eyes before she broke it. The merger would go through, Banks would consolidate, small ranches would be swallowed up by corporate agriculture, the world would move forward in its efficient, ruthless way. But something precious would be lost, something she'd never understood until she'd lived it. You taught me more than you knew. Jake folded his unfinished letter and tucked it into his father's Bible alongside the pressed flowers. The evening stars were emerging, bright and clear in the Wyoming sky. Somewhere in New York, Catherine was probably still at her desk, surrounded by the trappings of power she'd run away from. He wanted to hate her. It would be easier if he could, but every time he tried, he remembered her hands gentle on Thunder's neck, her quiet strength during the storm, her eyes full of wonder at simple things he'd taken for granted. Neither letter would ever be sent. Some wounds weren't meant to be opened again. Some bridges couldn't be unburned. But in the quiet moments between duties and obligations, both Jake and Catherine found themselves writing words that would never be read, trying to make sense of what was real and what was lost. Catherine sat in yet another board meeting, watching PowerPoint slides detail the rural acquisition strategy for First Wyoming Bank. The conference room walls were glass, the chairs leather, the coffee served in fine china cups that couldn't have been more different from Jake's chipped ceramic mug. "Ms. Wells, your thoughts on the McCullough property?" She startled at the name, maintaining her composure through years of practice. On the screen, Jake's ranch was reduced to satellite images and profit projections. 3 generations of history, transformed into potential development parcels. "The location is ideal for our western expansion," the presenter continued, unaware of how each word cut like glass. "Once foreclosure is complete, we can begin phase 1 of the resort development." Resort development. They were going to turn Jake's careful stewardship into golf courses and luxury cabins. Catherine felt sick. "I need to review the numbers," she heard herself say, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Have the full report on my desk by morning." Back in her office, she began to write, "Dear Board of Directors, after careful consideration, I find myself unable to continue as Executive Vice President of Wells Financial. My recent absence has given me clarity about both my role in this company and its role in the communities we impact." She paused, remembering Jake's words about legacy and responsibility, about things that mattered more than money. For 3 generations, Wells Financial has prided itself on building wealth. But in doing so, we have forgotten what true value means. I have seen firsthand the human cost of our market efficiency. I have watched history and heritage reduced to line items on a balance sheet. The merger with First Wyoming Bank represents everything wrong with our approach. We speak of progress while destroying the very foundations of communities. We calculate profit margins while ignoring the price paid in broken dreams and lost legacies. Thunder's gentle nicker echoed in her memory, along with Jake's quiet strength as he fought to save his land. She continued writing, "I cannot and will not be part of a system that values quarterly returns over generational wisdom. My grandfather built this company to serve communities, not consume them. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that mission. Therefore, effective immediately, I am resigning my position. My shares in the company will be placed in a trust dedicated to preserving family farming and ranching operations across the American West." "Catherine?" Her father's voice from the doorway made her look up. Robert Wells stood there, elegant in his bespoke suit, looking concerned. "The board is waiting for your merger presentation." She met his eyes, seeing for the first time how much pressure he carried, how the weight of empire had bent him into someone her grandfather might not recognize. "I'm not doing the presentation, Dad." "Of course you are. This merger is your pathway to CEO. Everything we've worked for, everything you've worked for," she corrected gently, turning back to her letter. "I found something else to work for." "This is about that ranch, isn't it? That cowboy?" His voice held equal parts disbelief and disappointment. "Catherine, be reasonable. It was a charming vacation, but this is your real life." She thought of Jake's hands gentle on Thunder's reins, of dawn breaking over Wyoming hills, of work that left you tired but proud. No, Dad, this isn't real. It's profitable and powerful, but it's not real. She signed the letter with a flourish, her signature strong and sure. Then she began a second letter, this one to the Wyoming State Banking Commission, detailing certain irregularities in First Wyoming Bank's foreclosure practices. "You're throwing everything away," her father said from the doorway. "And for what?" Catherine stood, smoothing her designer skirt one last time. "Not throwing away, Dad, building something true." She gathered the letters, her resignation and her revelation, weapons of a different kind of corporate raid. Behind her father, board members were gathering, sensing drama. Let them watch. Let them see what choosing truth looked like. "I learned something in Wyoming," she said, meeting her father's eyes. "Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that don't show up on balance sheets." She walked out of the office, out of the life planned for her since birth, carrying nothing but her purse and the letters that would change everything. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like descent from an ivory tower she'd never truly wanted to inhabit. Outside, Manhattan roared and rumbled, as far from Wyoming's peaceful silence as earth from heaven. But somewhere in her purse, pressed between the pages of her daybook, a wildflower from Jake's meadow reminded her what real treasure felt like. Jake saw the dust cloud on the horizon just as evening was drawing in. No truck this time, a single rider on a horse he didn't recognize. But he knew that straight-backed posture would have known it anywhere. Thunder nickered softly beside him, ears pricked forward in recognition. Catherine rode up to the fence line, handling her mount with the quiet confidence she'd learned during her stay. She was wearing jeans and a work shirt, her corporate armor nowhere in sight. In her hand was a leather portfolio that seemed out of place against the backdrop of gathering dusk. "You're trespassing," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "I know." She dismounted smoothly, leading her horse to stand beside Thunder. The two animals greeted each other like old friends, while their riders stood worlds apart. "But you need to see this." She pulled documents from the portfolio, holding them out. Jake didn't take them. "If that's another buyout offer, it's the deed to your ranch." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Free and clear. No loans, no liens, no bank involvement." Jake's jaw tightened. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity." Catherine set the papers on the fence post between them. "It's justice. First Wyoming Bank's foreclosure practices weren't just aggressive, they were illegal. The Banking Commission is investigating. All affected ranches are being restored to their rightful owners." Thunder pushed his nose against Catherine's shoulder, nearly knocking her off balance. She steadied herself on the fence, and for a moment, her carefully composed expression cracked. "I didn't come here to save you, Jake. I came here to make things right." "Right?" He finally looked at her directly, seeing the shadows under her eyes, the strain behind her professional mask. "You think a piece of paper makes everything right?" "No." She met his gaze without flinching. "But it's a start. The rest," she gestured to the space between them, "that's up to you." The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, the same colors it had worn the first night she appeared on his trail, lost and found all at once. "I resigned. From Wells Financial," she said into the silence. "Set up a trust for independent ranchers with my shares. Grandfather's original mission was to build communities, not destroy them. I'm going back to that." Jake picked up the deed, reading through the legal language that guaranteed his family's legacy. No tricks, no hidden clauses, just simple truth, written in complicated words. "Why?" The question came out rougher than he meant it to. "Because I learned what real means." Catherine's voice caught. "From you, from this land, from everything you showed me without meaning to." Thunder and Catherine's horse stood quiet beside each other, sharing breath in the gathering dark. Like them, Jake thought, the horses knew what was real without needing words to prove it. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Catherine continued, "or for anything else. Just wanted you to know that what happened here, what I found here, it changed. Everything. Not just for you and your ranch, but for dozens of others facing the same fight. She turned to go, but Jake's voice stopped her. The coffee's still hot. She looked back, hope warring with caution in her eyes. Might as well come in and explain exactly what free and clear means in all that legal language. He patted Thunder's neck, avoiding her gaze. Horse looks like it could use some rest too. Catherine's smile was tentative, but real. As real as the deed in his hands, as real as the land under their feet, as real as the truth they'd both been fighting their way toward from different directions. I'd like that, she said softly. They walked toward the house together, not touching, but not apart, while their horses grazed peacefully in the last light of day. Some distances, Jake thought, could only be crossed one careful step at a time. Morning found them on the front porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. 2 coffee mugs steamed on the railing, Jake's old chipped one, and the delicate ceramic cup Catherine had brought from her apartment. A strange but fitting pair. I've been thinking, Jake said, breaking a comfortable silence, about what you said last night about your grandfather's vision for the bank. Catherine turned to face him, waiting. This land, he continued, gesturing to the expanse before them. It's never really belonged to just one person. My grandfather knew that. He was just its caretaker for a while. Same as my father, same as me. Thunder and Catherine's mare grazed. Together in the paddock, their different breeding evident, but their contentment shared. The old ranch sign came down in the storm, Jake said. Been meaning to put up a new one. Catherine's breath caught as she understood what he wasn't quite saying. Jake, not offering partnership out of gratitude, he said quickly, or because of the deed, but because you see this place the way I do, way my father did, not as something to own, but as something to preserve. He pulled out a rough sketch from his pocket, spreading it on the porch railing between their coffee cups. The design showed a new sign for the ranch entrance, combining the traditional McCullough brand with elements that spoke of new beginnings. It's beautiful, Catherine said softly, tracing the lines with her finger. But are you sure? After everything, been sure since the night of the storm, Jake interrupted. Just took my pride a while to catch up with my heart. He turned to face her fully. You could have stayed gone, could have handled the bank investigation from New York, could have just sent the deed, but you came back. Had to, Catherine said simply. Some things are worth more than pride. Jake nodded toward the paddock where the horses grazed. Thunder knew. Horses usually do. They can tell real from pretend better than people. Catherine's hand found his on the railing, her fingers still soft, but marked now with the beginnings of calluses from ranch work. I'm not the same person who showed up on your trail that day. Good. Jake's voice was gruff with emotion. Neither am I. They walked together to the ranch entrance where the old sign had stood. The morning sun caught the dew on the grass, turning each drop into a tiny diamond. Partnership means equal say, Jake said, marking where the new posts would go. Equal work, too. No more playing at being a ranch hand. Catherine smiled, remembering her first awkward attempts at ranch work. Wouldn't have it any other way, though I might still have some ideas about modernizing the bookkeeping. Jake's laugh was warm and genuine. Figured you might, just as long as we keep the important things traditional, like morning coffee on the porch, like that. He paused in his measuring. And like knowing some things don't need saying to be true. Catherine understood. They'd both said enough with words. Now was the time for proving truth through actions, day by day, season by season. They worked together through the morning, digging post holes for the new sign. Each shovelful of earth felt like breaking down another wall between past and future, between who they had been and who they were becoming. Thunder wandered over to investigate their progress, followed by Catherine's mare. The horses stood watch as the new sign took shape, their quiet presence a reminder that some partnerships were written in deeper things than ink and paper. My father would have liked you, Jake said, as they stepped back to admire their work. Once he got past the whole Wells financial thing, Catherine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder. Think he would have understood about changing course when you realize you're headed the wrong way? He's the one who taught me that, Jake said softly. Said a smart man knows when to stick to his path, but a wise one knows when to forge a new one. The new sign caught the sunlight, the fresh wood promising decades of weathering ahead. Like them, it would change with time, grow stronger through storms, develop character with age. But its foundation was true, rooted in soil that held 3 generations of dreams and now promised room for more. Thunder's morning wicker drew them both to the porch, where dawn was breaking over the mountains in streaks of rose and gold. Catherine wore Jake's mother's old apron over her riding clothes, her hair tied back in a practical braid. 2 coffee mugs sat companionably close on the porch railing. Jake reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the small box he'd been carrying for days. Inside lay a ring fashioned from his mother's favorite brooch, a piece of jewelry she'd worn only on special occasions, its golden flower petals now reformed into a delicate band holding a single diamond. My mother always said the right pieces. Find their proper place eventually, he said, drawing out the box. Took this into town last week, had old Tom Miller remake it. Catherine's breath caught as he opened the box. The ring caught the morning light, old gold and new design merging into something uniquely their own. You sure? She whispered, understanding all the layers of meaning in this offering of his family's history. Jake's answer was to slip the ring onto her finger, where it settled as naturally as morning dew on prairie grass. Some things you just know. Thunder nickered softly as if offering his own approval. Behind them, the new ranch sign caught the first full rays of sun, promise written in fresh-cut wood and weathered wisdom. 1 year later, Jake stood on the porch in the pre-dawn light, 2 mugs of coffee steaming on the railing. Catherine's delicate cup had long since been replaced by one that matched his own, sturdy, practical, marked by daily use and care. The sound of hoofbeats drew his gaze to the paddock, where Catherine was already exercising the new colts. Thunder watched from his favorite spot, the old horse's gentle guidance helping train the next generation. The ranch had flourished under their shared care. Catherine's business sense paired with Jake's generations of wisdom had created something neither could have built alone. The ledgers showed health instead of decline, but more importantly, the land itself seemed to thrive under the blend of traditional stewardship and careful innovation. Jake lifted both coffee mugs as Catherine approached, her ring catching the first rays of sunrise. She took her cup with a smile that still made his heart skip, just as it had that first evening on the trail. "Ready for another day?" she asked, fitting herself against his side. Jake looked out over their land, where the new ranch sign stood proud against the Wyoming sky. "With you, always."